and thank you for inviting me to this great day. As Eva said, my name is Dan Spegel, and I am working with exhibitions primarily at Värmlands Museum in Kārlstade. And I'm here to talk about our collection of works by Jāzeps Grosvalds. They consist of watercolors, small-scale watercolors, 2 series. 53 of them could be called the Rifleman series, and the other ones are from his journey to the Middle East. So it's I'm not a mathematician, but if you sum these up, I think it's 221 works in total. So it's it's one of our bigger collections from with works from one single artist, and it's also you may ask yourself, why is this collection at Värmlands Museum? And that was the question I asked myself when I started working with this material. It was not clear to me why was a collection of a Latvian artist that served in the First World War and traveled through the Middle East with the British military campaign. Why was that collection in Kārlstade of all places? So I decided I need to kind of figure this out and understand this, the story behind this. And it turned out to be quite an interesting story that I will give you the outlines of here. And it's also a story that goes back almost 100 years of journeys across the Baltic Sea, with collaborations between Kārlstade and Rīgā. And Värmlands Museum is a county museum. It's not a big state museum. It's located in the county of Värmland. This is how it looks now. When the donation was made by Jāzep's sister Margareta in 1977, it was only this building. Today it's 2 buildings, but then it was only 1 building. So this is the original building that opened in 1929. And if you wonder where Kārlstade is located, it's at the top of Lake Vänern. You see the big lake, and it's close to the Norwegian border. And Kārlstade is I looked it up before I came here, it's like the 20th largest city in Sweden. So it's not one of our biggest cities. Of course, there's lots of connections between Sweden and the Grosvalds family. As you know, Jāzep's father was the envoy for Scandinavia and had his office in Stockholm. And around the time of Jāzep's death in 1920, and a couple of years following that. But the real connection between Kārlstade and the Grosvalds family starts a bit later. It's primarily due to this man. He's called Helge Kjellin. He was a multifaceted man. He was an art historian, and he wrote articles, poems, novels in big quantities. He was the first director of the Värmlands Museum in Kārlstade. So he was, when the museum opened, he was responsible for making all the exhibitions, and he kept that position for over 20 years. And you might think that running a museum would be enough for one person, but he thought that why not also combine this with being a professor of art history in Rīgā at the same time. So during the autumn, he was in Rīgā doing lecturing at 200% speed, and then he was in Sweden the rest of the year. And he kept this up for almost 3 years. He was no stranger to the Baltic states, however. Before he was in Riga, he had been from 1921 to 26, also as art historian in Tartu University in Estonia. And His primary focus was actually church buildings and medieval art. And in Estonia, I was very occupied with like measuring churches, and this painting is from an expedition they made to the island of Ösel, made by one of his students, and it describes how he's the man with the pipe sitting in this vehicle next to the pig. It's quite a funny picture. But in Latvia, he was much more also involved in contemporary art, and he was quite interested in the art scene and the artists that were in Latvia at that time. And he wrote some texts. One of them is maybe the first text devoted to Latvian art published in Sweden. It's called Modern Painting of Latvia. It was published in a paper for art history. So he's like, he took his knowledge that he gained in Latvia and he wrote articles. He also wrote, maybe you can call it a book, but Latvian art that was published only in Latvian in 1932. And he also got personally acquainted with many artists that he'll remain friends with for many years to come. He also got to know the Grosvalds family during this time. He was, from his diary notes that are preserved in Stockholm, we know that he went to the Grosvalds place in 1930, and that he got acquainted with Jāzeps' works in this time, because he writes in these texts about something about the family, and that he also really appreciated, especially the Persian sketches, and considered them like the finest examples of modern Latvian art. He was also, at the same time, he was organizing an exhibition of Latvian art in Kārlstade at Värmlands Museum. It's actually one of the first exhibitions to take place at the museum. So even from the start, there is this connection between Latvia and Kārlstade. And this exhibition featured quite prominent names today in Latvian art history. You can see some paintings by Niklas Strunke in the background. Alexandra Beltrova also was in this, and Konrad Zubans, and so forth. And we know from some letters that he also wanted to borrow some of the Jāzeps Grosvalds works, but that his mother writes to him that she thanks for the request, but she had been in contact with Olgerts, and he didn't want to give his approval, and she couldn't give that approval to lend the works herself. It was all because he was very like, oh, he is a deceased person that cannot remake his works. So they considered it too large of a risk to lend this to Sweden. When Kjellin quit the job at the university, he returned to Värmland, but he kept in touch with his friends in Latvia, and we know from quite a detailed diary entry from 1937 or 36 that he went to Riga and he again met the Grosvalds family. Then Jāzeps' mother was dead, but we know that he met the sisters, and that he also met with other artists, Valdemar Tonne and Theodor Saukans. It's quite detailed notes from this trip. And he was also he had lots of contacts. This is from his address book, and it's like bursting with papers and contacts all over Europe and Sweden. Of course, this is from the 40s, and you can see that down there is the sisters, Margareta and Lina. The addresses and phone numbers. because Margareta and Lina were living in Riga when the occupation, Russian occupation, the Soviet occupation first. And Margareta decided to leave Latvia. She was working in the Foreign Office. It's a bit unclear to me what her position actually was there, but there's reason to believe that she feared for her life, and she was very eager to leave Latvia. And she succeeds in doing this in 1940, because she sends a letter to Helge Kjellin, where she explained that she is now in Sweden and she is also a Swede, as she writes, a Swedish citizen. She says that she has married a man only for, not out of love, but only for practical purposes, and that he's away a lot in the field, as I say. So you can wonder, who is this man? Because she's changed her name to Margareta Ternberg this time. Who is this Ternberg fellow? Turns out that he is quite an interesting person. His name is Helmut Ternberg, but it's said of him that he hated his name, Helmut, and he wanted to be called Teddy. And he was actually the deputy head of the secret Swedish military intelligence service during this time. And he was, around this time, he was in charge of building intelligence networks, firstly on this Finnish-Swedish border, secondly on the border between Norway and Sweden. He was in charge of putting out people that could handle information traveling across the border and so forth. And he was also in charge of the eastern part of Russia, of the Baltic states, of Poland and Hungary. This was his field. He was leading the intelligence work. And actually, there were some connections between Ternbergs and the Grosvalds, because Jāzeps' mother and Ternberg's mother, they knew each other from their upbringing. They attended the same school, somewhere in what was then Livland province of the Russian Empire. And when the Grosvalds were in Stockholm, and the ambassadors and envoys, they were, the Ternbergs' mother had an apartment in Stockholm that served as some kind of a meeting point for people from the Baltic states that had come to Sweden. So we know that mother used to visit Ternberg's mother. If somehow Margareta and Helmut knew of each other or had met prior to the marriage, we don't really know. But you might suspect that Margareta was somehow involved in some kind of deal. Maybe she could deliver some information, or maybe she was connected with some Swedish intelligence network. It's difficult to say exactly, but probably she had some kind of connection between Swedish diplomats working in Riga at that time, because she mentions, it's mentioned in a letter that there was an agreement made regarding her escape to Sweden. So, and when she came to Sweden, she started working at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Sweden as part of that deal. This is not two different persons, it's the same person, as you may know, because Helmut Ternberg had several identities that he used when he traveled around Europe during the Second World War. One of them was Robert Georg Bross, was an economist. Actually, when he married Margareta in 1940, he needed to figure out some way to be allowed to travel to the Baltic states to be able to marry her. So he managed to convince the chief editor of Dagens Nyheter, which is the most prestigious newspaper in Sweden, to write him a certificate as a journalist, so that he could go to Estonia, and from there to the other Baltic states undercover as a journalist. And somehow, we don't know how this exactly happened, but he marries Margareta, and he brings her back to Stockholm. This is in the war archive in Stockholm. There is some documents related to Tandberg. This is one of his passport applications as one of his alter egos, Robert Georg Bross. The agency he was working for was called Sea-byrån, or the Sea Bureau. It's a very strange organization. They had an office only in a small apartment in Stockholm, and they created lots of companies and other things to be able to work undercover. They had a journalist firm. They could provide news from different, so they can travel as journalists all across Europe. They also sold Finnish machine guns to the resistance movement in Norway and Denmark, and apparently made lots of money doing this, millions. And this is from Expressen, also an evening tabloid, this was like a big scandal after the war, that they had made lots of money on these companies. So the Sea Bureau was dissolved after the war. But from the beginning, it was said that also Lina should follow along in this deal. Margareta writes in the letter that I only agreed to this because Lina was also supposed to come with me, but in the end she couldn't bear to leave the people that needed her, then also she couldn't leave the works of Jāzeps that she wanted to protect somehow. So she stayed in Riga, and there is some correspondence between Margareta and Helge Kjellin, where they talk about how to get Lina to come to Stockholm as well. And both of them had wide connections with diplomats, Swedish diplomats, situated in Berlin, in Gdansk, and various cities across Europe, that they could send letters to and ask and try to prepare for Lina to also come to Stockholm. And when the second Soviet occupation was in 1944, she decided she leave, and she traveled, from the letters, via Berlin, and managed to get to Stockholm. And from Kjellin's diaries, we know that he visited them in Easter 1945, and that he writes that Margareta, she served coffee, and Lina told stories about occupied Latvia. But she wasn't, she didn't leave all the works behind. She brought with her what she could out of her beloved brother's works. So the paintings that are today in our museums were brought to Sweden by Lina. They were what she could practically take with her. So she took the watercolors out of the frames and put them in a, I don't know how she put them, but yeah, she brought them to Sweden with her, and they remained in her possession until she died in the early 70s. And Helge Kjellin, he kept working with his former friends in the Baltic nations. He was not only promoting Latvian art, also Estonian art, and he also had many of his former students or colleagues. He arranged so they could work as so-called archive workers at the museum. So there were, during 1944 and 1945, around 15 refugees working with, in the archives from the various countries, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, Norway, so forth. Also know from a letter that he tried to get one of these jobs for Jāzeps Grosvalds as well, but that was never, wasn't needed because she got a job in Stockholm at another place. But he was a good friend with Niklas Strunke, and he helped, when he came to Sweden, he helped him by arranging a big exhibition of his works in 1945. He also was a close friend of Valdemar Tonne. This is from Tonne exhibited at the Royal Art Academy in Stockholm. Kjellin held an introductory speech. So, and Helmut Ternberg, there's no evidence that Margareta and him had any kind of real relationship, but it's hard to know from the sources how much contact they had with each other. Somewhere said that they met once a year for a cup of tea. But yeah, we don't know. He died in Germany. And this is his tombstone in Stockholm. It says, the eye and ear of the fatherland, 1940, 1945. Meaning that he was the, yeah, referencing his intelligence work during the war. When Lina died, Margareta, the question was, of course, what should I do with works, Jāzeps works that are in my possession? And we know from the letters surrounding the donation to the museum that there was a wish that this collection should not be spread out, that it should be kept in one place, and that they were thinking about some Swedish museum. And also seemed to have been kind of a collective effort from the exiled Latvian community. It was not doesn't seem like it was only her that this was an important question for. It was also for all of them that they thought we need to find a place that can hold this collection, and they thought of Värmlands Museum because of Helge Kjellin and what he had done for promoting Latvian art and for his friendship with the Grosvalds family. So since 1977 we have this collection in our museum. We are happy now that it's 150 of them are on display here. And that was all for me. Thank you.